The address is 7th Avenue and 31st Street, Manhattan. 650,000 people pass through this point every weekday. They descend into a warren of low ceilings and fluorescent tunnels beneath Madison Square Garden. The corridors are narrow, the signage is poor, heads stay down. They are walking on a grave. 60 years ago, this exact ground held one of the greatest buildings America ever produced. Pink granite quarried from Massachusetts. Travertine cut from the same Italian hills that built ancient Rome. A vaulted glass ceiling 15 stories above the floor. It stood here for 53 years. Then a railroad company decided the building was worth more dead than alive. This is the story of the address. Predion. In 1900, the area west of Herald Square was called the Tenderloin. It was Manhattan's vice district. Brothels, gambling halls, saloons, and tenement walk-ups stretched between 6th and 8th Avenues. The Pennsylvania Railroad, at the time the largest corporation in the world, saw an opportunity. The company's trains terminated in New Jersey. Passengers had to ferry across the Hudson River to reach Manhattan. It was a 90-minute insult to a railroad that prided itself on speed. In 1899, Alexander Cassatt took over as president. He had spent decades watching European stations, the Gare d'Orsay in Paris, the great central halls of Berlin and London, and he wanted New York to have one greater than all of them. His engineers told him a Hudson River bridge was impossible. Cassatt's answer was to go under. Twin tunnels would be bored beneath the river bottom. The trains would surface in Midtown Manhattan, and at the surface, on a site spanning 2 full city blocks, the railroad would build a temple. In 1902, Cassatt hired McKim, Mead White, the most prestigious architectural firm in America. Charles Follen McKim took the lead. McKim was a Beaux-Arts purist who had studied at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. When asked what model he had in mind for the new station, he answered with a single reference: the Baths of Caracalla. The Roman public baths, built in the 3rd century, had been the largest indoor public space the ancient world ever produced. McKim wanted to recreate it in New York. Construction began in 1904. The Pennsylvania Railroad bought up 2.5 blocks, bounded by 7th and 8th Avenues, 31st and 33rd Streets. More than 500 buildings were demolished. 8 acres of Manhattan were cleared down to bedrock. From that pit, the tunnels descended 75 feet beneath the Hudson on one side and the East River on the other, connecting Long Island and New Jersey by rail for the first time in history. The above-ground structure rose in pink Milford granite, quarried from a single quarry in Massachusetts. The interior was clad in travertine, the same warm stone the Romans had used in the Colosseum. 84 exterior Doric columns, each 45 feet tall, ringed the perimeter. The total cost ran to roughly $114 million. In current value, the project would exceed $4 billion. Alexander Cassatt did not live to see it finished. He died of heart failure in December 1906. Charles McKim, broken by the workload, died in 1909. Pennsylvania Station opened to the public on November 27, 1910. The first scheduled train left for Long Island a few minutes after midnight. For passengers entering from 7th Avenue, the experience was choreographed. A traveler stepped through the colonnade into a vestibule, then through a smaller hall, then, without warning, into the main waiting room. It was 314 feet long, 108 feet wide. The coffered ceiling rose 150 feet above the floor. It was the largest indoor public space in the United States. The room was modeled directly on the central hall of the Baths of Caracalla. 8 Corinthian columns, each 60 feet tall, supported the vault. Light entered through massive arched windows along the upper walls. The floor was Tennessee pink marble. From the waiting room, passengers passed into the train concourse. Here, McKim broke from the Roman model. The concourse roof was a network of steel and glass arches, vaulted like a Gothic cathedral, but engineered like an industrial bridge. Sunlight poured down onto the platforms below. Adolph Alexander Weinman, a German-born sculptor, was commissioned to produce the building's stone ornament. He designed 22 granite eagles, each weighing 5,000 pounds, mounted on the building's exterior. He sculpted twin allegorical figures, day and night, flanking each of the 4 exterior clocks. Day held a sunflower, night held a poppy. The figures were 6 feet tall. They watched over 7th Avenue for 53 years. The station became a fixture of American life. By the mid-1910s, it was handling tens of millions of passengers a year. During the Roaring Twenties, the building anchored a thriving theater and hotel district. The Hotel Pennsylvania opened across the avenue in 1919 with a phone number, Pennsylvania 65000, that Glenn Miller would turn into a #1 hit 2 decades later. Through the Great Depression, the station kept moving. Trains kept arriving. The waiting room remained one of the few free, climate-controlled public spaces in Manhattan, where homeless men slept on the benches and society women waited for the Broadway Limited to Chicago. The 20th Century Limited departed from rival Grand Central Terminal across town. The Broadway Limited departed from Penn. The two trains competed for the same New York to Chicago business for half a century. Then came the war. By 1944, Pennsylvania Station was handling more than 100 million passengers a year. It was the busiest train station in the world. Every American soldier who shipped out from the eastern seaboard to Europe passed through this room. Every body that came home for burial returned through it as well. Photographs from those years show the waiting room packed wall to wall with men in olive uniforms and women in farewell dresses. The clocks above kept time over the largest mass migration in American history. The peak year was 1945. The station handled over 100 million passengers in 12 months. It was the height of the building's significance. The peak was also the beginning of the end. The same year the Second World War ended, commercial aviation began its rapid expansion. In 1956, President Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act. 41,000 miles of interstate began to be poured. The American middle class bought cars. They flew to Florida. They drove to California. By 1957, intercity rail ridership had been cut roughly in half from its wartime peak. The Pennsylvania Railroad, once the largest corporation in the world, was hemorrhaging money. The station itself became part of the problem. The pink granite exterior, after 50 years of New York coal soot and industrial air, was nearly black. Studies in the late 1950s estimated that fully cleaning the building would cost millions of dollars the railroad did not have. The roof leaked. The clocks stopped. The travertine in the waiting room grew dingy. By the early 1960s, executives at the Pennsylvania Railroad looked at their balance sheet, then looked up at the most expensive building they owned. They began to do math. The math, in the end, was simple. Above ground, the station occupied 8 acres of Manhattan real estate. Below ground, the tracks and platforms were the actual asset. The Pennsylvania Railroad did not need the building. It needed the trains. In 1961, the railroad's executives reached a quiet agreement with a developer named Irving Felt. Felt controlled Madison Square Garden, then located on 50th Street. He wanted to move it. The railroad agreed to sell him the air rights above the station. The trains would continue to operate. The building above them would come down. A new Madison Square Garden and a new office tower would rise in its place. The deal was announced publicly on July 24, 1961. The reaction, at first, was muted. Most New Yorkers did not understand what the words air rights meant. Then, in early 1962, the railroad released its formal plan. The Beaux-Arts station would be demolished. Construction would begin within 18 months. A small group of architects read the announcement and went to work. On August 2, 1962, 6 architects formed the Action Group for Better Architecture in New York. They called it AGBANY. Among them were Norval White, Elliot Wilensky, and Peter Samton. Within days, they were joined by Philip Johnson, who had designed the Glass House and helped design the Seagram Building, Aline Saarinen, the architecture critic for the New York Times, Jane Jacobs, who had just published The Death and Life of Great American Cities. They organized a picket line outside the station. Photographs from that day show Philip Johnson in a dark suit, holding a hand-painted sign. Jane Jacobs walked beside him. The picket lasted hours. The press covered it briefly. The railroad did not respond. Within the city government, no legal mechanism existed to stop a private property owner from demolishing his own building. The historic preservation laws that exist today didn't exist then. Demolition began on October 28, 1963. The first targets were the Eagles. Workers used jackhammers to separate the 5,000-pound granite birds from the cornice. They were lowered to the street with cables and crane. Some were sold, some were given away. Most were trucked to a dump. 2 days later, on October 30th, the New York Times published an editorial titled, "Farewell to Penn Station." The opening line read, "Until the first blow fell, no one was convinced that Penn Station really would be demolished, or that New York would permit this monumental act of vandalism against one of the largest and finest landmarks of its age of Roman elegance." The editorial closed with a sentence that has been quoted in every preservation textbook since. "We will probably be judged not by the monuments we build, but by those we have destroyed." The demolition crews kept working. The day and night sculptures came down next. Then the Doric columns. The travertine cladding was pried from the walls in slabs. The pink granite was broken apart with sledgehammers. The work took 3 years. Throughout that time, the trains kept running. Passengers descended through scaffolding and plywood barriers, past plastic sheeting and exposed steel, while above them, the largest indoor public space in the United States was reduced to rubble. The rubble had to go somewhere. The Pennsylvania Railroad and its contractors hauled it across the Hudson River into the meadowlands of New Jersey. There, in the marshland near Secaucus, the granite columns and travertine walls and Tennessee marble floors of Pennsylvania Station were dumped. For years afterward, photographers walking the meadowlands found Corinthian capitals and fragments of Adolph Weinman's allegorical figures lying in the reeds. Eddie Hausner of the New York Times photographed them in 1966. The images show columns half submerged in mud, a stone eagle's head lying on its side, the cast face of day, sunflower hand still gripping the stone, surrounded by swamp grass. The most photographed building in New York City, after the Empire State, had been carted out and buried in a swamp. The demolition was completed in 1966. The new Madison Square Garden opened on February 11, 1968. The new Penn Station, the one passengers use today, opened beneath it the same year. The destruction of Pennsylvania Station didn't save the Pennsylvania Railroad. By 1968, the company was financially exhausted. It merged that year with its old rival, the New York Central, to form Penn Central. 2 years later, in June 1970, Penn Central filed for bankruptcy. It was at the time the largest corporate failure in American history. The railroad that had built the greatest building in New York and torn it down to save itself did not survive a decade after the demolition, but something else did survive. The picket line outside the station in 1962, the editorials in the Times, the photographs of marble columns being cut down to size. These had done their work. By 1964, Mayor Robert F. Wagner, Jr. had appointed a commission to draft a historic preservation law for New York City. The commission's report cited Pennsylvania Station by name. On April 19, 1965, 18 months after the first jackhammer struck the first eagle, Wagner signed the Landmarks Preservation Law into effect. It created the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission, with the legal authority to designate buildings as protected landmarks. Once designated, those buildings could not be altered or demolished without commission approval. The law was tested almost immediately. In 1968, the Penn Central Railroad, desperate for cash, proposed building a 55-story office tower on top of Grand Central Terminal. The Landmarks Commission refused. The railroad sued. The case went to the United States Supreme Court. In June 1978, the court ruled 6-3 in favor of the city. Penn Central versus New York established the constitutional foundation of historic preservation law in the United States. Grand Central Terminal was saved. Every preservation law in the country, in some way, traces back to the swamp in Secaucus. The eagles fared better than the rest of the building. 22 were sculpted. At least 14 survived. 4 are mounted today at the entrance to the current Madison Square Garden on 7th Avenue, looking out over the same intersection their predecessors guarded. 2 stand outside Cooper Union. 1 is at the United States Merchant Marine Academy on Long Island. 1 sits in a town park in Hicksville. 1 is in Vinalhaven, where the original sculpting was done. The other fragments scattered. Brooklyn Museum holds the head of one of Weinman's allegorical figures. A few Doric column shafts ended up on private estates on Long Island. Most of the rest is still buried in the meadowlands, gradually settling into the New Jersey clay. The address itself, 7th Avenue and 31st Street, is occupied today by Madison Square Garden and the structures that surround it. Above ground, the site is a windowless drum of precast concrete and steel. Below ground, in the warren beneath, More than 600,000 passengers pass through every weekday. They are using a station designed in 1968 to serve a fraction of that load. In 2021, after decades of debate, New York opened a partial replacement. The James A. Farley Building across 8th Avenue, a 1912 building also designed by McKim, Mead and White, with the same pink granite and the same Roman columns, was converted into Moynihan Train Hall. It serves Amtrak and Long Island Railroad passengers. Its glass roof is engineered to evoke the original concourse of 1910. The new hall has been received as a partial atonement. It is not the same building. It cannot be. As of 2026, plans for a full reconstruction of Penn Station continue to circulate at the state and city level. Renderings appear in the press. Funding remains uncertain. Madison Square Garden's lease at the site has been the subject of ongoing political contest. Whether the structure on top will ever come down is a question the next generation will have to answer. The original building cost $114 million to construct. The current estimate to recreate it, even partially, exceeds $7 billion. In 1969, 6 years after the demolition began, the architectural historian Vincent Scully published a book called American Architecture and Urbanism. In it, he wrote a single sentence about Pennsylvania Station that has outlived nearly everything else written about the building. One entered the city like a god, Vincent Scully wrote. One scuttles in now like a rat. That sentence is the entire indictment, compressed. A building is not just a building. A building is a posture. The original Pennsylvania Station told its arrivals that they had reached a place that took itself seriously. The current station tells them they have reached a place that does not. Architecture is the most public art form. It cannot be hidden in a museum. Every person who passes a building is shaped, briefly, by what it asks of them. Penn Station asked something of New York for 53 years. Then a balance sheet asked something different, and the building came down. The eagles still watch the corner. The columns are still in the swamp. The address is still here. If a forensic biography of an American place is the kind of work you want to keep watching, subscribe and stay with us. The next episode follows another address, a piece of ground where the building above tells one story and the records below tell a different one. The address is the witness. We just write down what it has seen.